Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me as a president of the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences to open up the third season of the Spring Talks of the USUSS. It's a series of talks starting today with Philippe Descola, and it starts today and it ends on April 21st. And I will give you more information about the whole program at the end of Philippe's talk. Philippe Descola is probably one of the greatest anthropologists in the world today. He's part of a very old and very interesting tradition at the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences that started a long time ago with Claude Lévi-Strauss. And the Laboratoire d'Anthropologie Sociale, the lab of social anthropology, has been and still is a place where a specific view of anthropology started a long time ago and is still today very interesting and very rich. I won't have the time to tell you about all the books by Philippe Descola, and he has published so many interesting books redefining the frontier between nature and culture, and using his anthropological framework to help us understand today's society. I will give him the floor right now to tell you more about images in views by an anthropologist, and enjoy the talk. And after Philippe's talk, we will have a time for a Q&A session, and all questions will be welcome. And I think you have to write down your questions on the chat, and then I will give Philippe all the time he needs to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Enjoy the talk, and thank you so much, Philippe, for being here.
Thank you, Romain, for this invitation, and good day to everyone, wherever you are. This is not going to be a traditional seminar in the sense that won't focus on a specific topic, but it will be a seminar that is summing up of work in progress and also part of the work I've done in the past years on the general idea of figuration. But before entering into the main topic, I would like to say a few words of how I got to be interested in images. I started, like all anthropologists, by doing fieldwork for a number of years in the upper Amazon. And my interest at the time was to study the relationship between humans and non-humans, what I termed at the time the processes of socialization of nature. And this took me some time to understand that the way I presented, or at least I had formulated my research agenda, was not really correct, in the sense that my experience, my ethnographic experience, showed that there was not really a socialization of nature, because there was no nature and there was no socialization to speak of, for a variety of reasons. The first was quite technical, in the sense that my ethnological and ecological work showed that the people with whom I was living, the Achuar, a Jivaroan group in the upper Amazon, in the border between Ecuador and Peru, in fact had a specific technique of slash and burn horticulture, which I discovered afterward was quite common elsewhere in the Amazon, and which consisted not only of cultivating domesticated plants, but also of transplanting plants from the forest. And the result of this process, as was shown later on also by colleagues in other parts of the Amazon, is that when the Sweden was abandoned after a few years of cultivation. The cultivated, the domestic plants, domesticated plants, mainly manioc or sweet potatoes, etc., were disappeared quite quickly under the assault of the forest, while the transplanted plants from the forest, which were mainly fruit-bearing trees and palm trees, resisted this colonization by the surrounding vegetation. And if you think of this process in the long term, it means that year after year, centuries after centuries, millennia after millennia, the composition of the forest begins slowly to change, in the sense that these plants were useful to humans, tend to have a higher density than in places where there were no presence of humans. So the result of this, which is now something which is admitted and has been also verified by archaeological studies, is that the Amazonian forest is an anthropogenic forest, a forest whose floristic composition, in fact, is completely distinct from pieces of the forest that have not been transformed by humans. So it's a sort of cultivated forest in a sense. So you can't speak of nature in that sense of socialization of nature as if a human population had been transported to a place, to an ecosystem which was pristine, because in fact, for millennia, the inhabitants of the Amazonian forest have been transforming their milieu and creating a milieu that they transmitted to their descendants. So in that sense, there's not a white forest on the one side and a society that transforms these white forests on the other side, but a process of coevolution between humans and plants. The second reason for my realizing that the notion of socialization of the forest was not accurate was that the Huret consider non-humans, that is plants, animals, but also spirits, as social partners. They do not belong to a realm of nature which is exterior to human activity or to human endeavors, but they are partners with whom there is a daily communication. On the one hand, through dreams, that is, during dreams, non-humans come and visit the dreamers and express themselves. They establish a dialogue, which of course is related to day-to-day activities, like precisely slash and burn horticulture, which is the domain of women, and hunting and fishing with harpoon, which is the domain of men. And in these dreams, non-humans appear as humans, and they present themselves as humans and say, I'm so and so, I'm such and such a plant in your garden, when in a woman's dream, and this is my problem. Or I am a harder monkey, and I give you an appointment for tomorrow afternoon in such and such a place, etc., etc. And there's another aspect also of this dimension of non-humans as social partners, which is that the humans have a vast array of songs which they sing mentally in order to address both humans when they are very distant, or non-humans, and to transmit a message which is often an answer to what has been acquired as information during the dreams. And these songs, which are sung mentally or sotto voce, are considered as a discourse of the soul, which goes directly to the soul of non-humans and to influence their behavior. So in that respect, these songs, which are a huge amount of them, and every person knows at least 100 of these songs that correspond to any situation that they have to confront daily. And so this meant that instead of a society having to adapt to a natural environment, what I was facing or observing among the Achuar was a set of non-human maintaining social relationship with non-humans in a variety of circumstances where they try to exert an influence on the non-humans and follow social patterns, of competition, alliance, seduction, etc., etc. So when I came back to France to do my PhD, I had to find a way of describing this without using straightforward opposition between nature and society or nature and culture, because obviously there was no question of this in this ethnographic setting. In particular, there was no word for nature, and I discovered progressively that there are very few languages apart from European languages where there is a linguistic equivalent of the word nature, and also certain terms like person in Achuar, it's eins, were used to my surprise not only to designate humans but also non-human, other than human persons, because they had an interiority, they had a soul. They had a subjectivity. You could communicate with them, and in that measure, although their physical appearance was different, they were treated as persons. So it was obvious that here there was a form of interaction between humans and non-humans that did not correspond to the standard opposition between nature and society. And this supposition, there was a contrast, though, between humans and non-humans, but it wasn't the type of contrast we were used to in the West, in the sense that it was not a contrast between humans as possessing moral or cognitive capacities that put them apart from the rest of the world, but non-humans that were apart from humans because their physical dimension was different from their human counterparts. So in that sense, both among the Achuar and, as I discovered afterwards, among other Amazonian people, there was this idea that every form of life, every species, if you wish, although the term species is not completely adequate, every form of life lives in its own world because its physical capacities, its dispositions connect the members of the species with specific aspect of a specific milieu. so that the world of a fish is not the world of an eagle, which is not the world of such an insect or of a snake or of a human. So there was a contrast then between the kind of opposition between nature and society, which I was familiar with, which I absorbed in my education, and the one that I was facing. And this opposition, this distinction was that there was a continuity in terms of interiority, in terms of subjectivity between humans and non-humans, and a discontinuity in terms of physical dimensions or physical dispositions. While in our system, the one I wrote in my anthropologist conceptual toolbox, there was a discontinuity in terms of subjective capacity, moral and cognitive capacities, with an exceptionality of humans, and continuity in terms of physical dispositions, because since the 18th century, it is considered normal that it has been considered normal by more and more people, let's say among the elites first, that humans and non-humans share physical dependence towards physical laws in physics, chemistry, and then in the 19th century in biology. So there was a contrast there, and I began to explore this contrast because precisely after my doctoral thesis, I was fortunate enough to be recruited at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, and I had a research seminar. And so with my students for years, I explored all these forms of contrast, forms of continuity and discontinuity between humans and non-humans. First in the area where I'd done my fieldwork, that is in Amazonia, and then in other parts of the world. And I discovered that this form of establishing continuities and discontinuities, or detecting rather continuities and discontinuities between humans and non-humans that I had observed in the upper Amazon were common not only in Amazonia, but also in other places like the northern North America, Siberia, some parts of Southeast Asia, in some parts of Melanesia, etc. And I decided to retrieve from oblivion a concept that had been very much in favor at the beginning of at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, which is the concept of animism, but describing animism precisely as this contrast between continuity of souls, if you wish, or continuity of interiorities, and discontinuity of bodies, discontinuities of physical capacities. By contrast with our system, which I labeled naturalism, because one of the main features of this system, when I mean ours, I mean the European, as it started in Europe in the 17th century in the text, and as we will see afterwards earlier on in images, because the idea that there is a nature, that nature exists, appeared to me as the standard mark of modernity. We are modern because we think that nature exists, no, by contrast with the rest of the world. And so I began exploring these contrasts, as I said, in this seminar for a number of years in other parts of the world. And of course, the contrast between animism and naturalism wasn't the only one that could be observed around the world. And I detected two other forms of establishing or detecting continuities and discontinuities between humans and non-humans, which I labeled totemism and animism. Totemism was a reflection on the very rich literature on Australian totemism, with a reflection which started among anthropologists, and not only anthropologists. One has to think about people like Freud or Durkheim, for instance, starting at the beginning of the 20th century, on these remarkable ethnographies that were progressively coming from Australia. And the idea of totemism is that, in that case, again, taking Australian Aborigines as a model for it, is that humans and non-humans form groups which share specific physical and moral capacities and dispositions. And but these groups differ between them because the kind of qualities that they share differ. The idea is that in Australia at least, but there are ideas like that elsewhere, is that prototypes appeared at the time on the surface of the Earth, and after had all sort of adventures, and then disappeared again, at least apparently, in the Earth, leaving sets of qualities that would be embodied in humans and non-humans of the same totemic group. And so a very interesting idea there in totemism, which I discovered by reading a linguist by the name of Carl Georg von Brandenstein, who had worked on the names of totems in Australia, was that the names of the totems were not so much names of animals as names of qualities, because most of the totems, at least 70 or more than 70% of the totems are names of animals. The names of animals are used to designate them, is that these are not names of animals, but names of qualities. And these qualities are used to designate animals. So it's not anymore the problem which puzzled philosophers and anthropologists during most of the 20th century, of how can people imagine that they descend from an animal, but that people embody a quality which is transmitted generation after generation, and this quality is used to designate an animal. So the fourth form of conceptualization of the discontinuities between humans and non-humans, it's a form which is familiar to us in Europe because it belongs to our almost immediate past, because it was active until the Renaissance, and it has there is some it survives in many aspects of our daily life, and I called it analogism. It's the idea that the world is composed of a great number of specific things, of disparities in a way, and this heterogeneous world, in order to be livable and to be thought of, to be conceptualized, needs connections to be established between these heterogeneous elements. And these connections are usually connections of correspondence. And these correspondences are usually based on analogical reasoning. which is of course universal, but takes a very specific importance in the case of analogism, and this is why I called it analogism. And so this is something which is common in our European past, and I mean in the Middle Ages until the Renaissance, and in the Antiquity, and also in other parts of the world, in the Far East, for instance, or in the cultures of the Andes, both pre-colonial and colonial, and of Mexico, for instance, or in Western Africa. And it's based on the idea that the world can be structured in spite of the vast diversity of its components by connecting some of its elements in transitive associations. One of them, for instance, which is very common, and which was very common in our tradition, is the grid chain of being. That is the idea that all the elements present in the world can be set hierarchically on a chain with very small intervals between them, but it's a graduated, it's a scalar system. No? Or another one, which is very common, is the correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm. That is the body as a sort of micro world, and some elements of the cosmic world, elements being both elements in the traditional sense of the earth, the air, the water, etc., or elements in the sense of, for instance, astral bodies. And these are very typical. There are even science indexes for determining what is if a social formation is analogous or not. These are very common in all these parts of the world I mentioned, but they have very little importance or none at all in animist or totemic social formations. So this is a system of detecting differences in the world, which I call the ontological filters. That is, ways of detecting, of making worlds, of worlding, to use the proper word, ways of worlding that use elements in the world that are being detected thanks to ontological filters. These ontological filters are those that are acquired during one's socialization, and which one shares with other people around, but which are based on this structural system of contrasts, which I mentioned between these four ways of worlding. And I published in 2005 a book which is a general theory of these ways of worlding, which has been translated into English as Beyond Nature and Culture. And after that book, I wondered whether there are hypotheses, there are formal models like we do in anthropology, no? And whether these models could be ascertained by using other documents than the one I used. The ones I used were basically texts, that is, ethnographic descriptions of transcription of myth, of rituals, medical treaties, etc., etc. And I wondered whether images could provide a sort of corroboration of these hypotheses. And this is when I started working on images. And so I used my seminar still. I want to emphasize the importance of the seminar, as a way of progressing. of discussing things in public and having to experiment new ideas through a constant discussion with an audience, no? And so I experimented this idea with images in my seminar and then at my lectures at the Collège de France. And I ended up by showing, that's what we're going to see now, that these ways of worlding could be detected also in images. So not so much in the way images described something iconically, but in the ways that the images themselves were organized and revealed the skeleton of the visible world, such as it was an organizing pattern for people in the way they perceived their environment. And so this is, if I manage to get to the, yes, fine. So I'll show that through a series of images. And I'll start with animist images. And these are images, yes, it works. To begin with, I drew from northern North America. This is a Yupik mask. The Yupik are a group of people speaking an Eskimo language in Alaska. And they used to organize in the winter festivals, during which they received in the common house animal spirits, in order, in particular, to thank them because they provided their flesh for humans to eat. And so, and this was of no consequence for the animals, as it is in many parts of the animist archipelago, because once they were killed, their soul or their interiority, their subjectivity would reincarnate itself into another body. And one way to present this duality of the non-human persons among the Yupik was to figure the physical disposition in the guise of a mask, which was immediately identifiable, in this case a fox mask, and inserting in the mask a small human face. And this small human face is not so much a human in disguise as the soul of the interiority of the subjectivity, which takes a human appearance of the animal spirit. There are different ways of, this is the most common form of showing this duality among the Yupik, but there are also very economical ways of doing that, like this mask, which is quite remarkable because in fact the human interiority is suggested by the fact that it's the mask is worn horizontally, or rather vertically, excuse me, with the two slits of the eyes, and suggesting that there's a human face behind. And so the interiority of the waterfall in that case is the face of the human, which is suggested by the way the mask is worn. A very obvious way of doing that are the so-called transformation masks that are so common on the northwest coast of northern North America, on the Pacific coast of northern North America. Transformation masks are masks that are worn by dancers in certain rituals, and they are composed of different parts, and they can open up thanks to a small piece of string that is activated in order to open the mask. And so they evoke a transformation, and this a sort of metamorphosis, because in fact the most important thing in animist ontology, if you wish, is the metamorphosis. That is a switch of appearance that you experiment when you look at a being, whatever the being, rather from the point of view of its interiority or from the point of view of its physical dispositions. So this opposition between interiority and physicality is absolutely central in animism. And so metamorphosis can be shown and activated by this transformation mask. In this case, it's the mask of a sculpin. It's a fish of this area, and which opens up to reveal a raven. And this raven is not a proper raven, it's the mask of a raven, which goes on a small face. It opens up on a small face, which is in fact the interiority of this transformational being. This the switch between physicality and interiority can be done also very simply, as in this case, by a lateral division between, on the one hand, on the right, the face of a fox, and on the other hand, on the left, the face of the human-like interiority of the fox. And you can switch, in fact, from one side to the other side and operate the transformation, the metamorphosis, by just a small switch, a commutation between each part of the mask. And an interesting thing is that if you go very far from this part of the world, that is from northern North America and the Pacific coast to Malaysia, there is an identical formal device which is in a shaman mask of the Mak Betisek. The Mak Betisek are Aboriginal people from Malaysia, and this mask is the tiger spirit. And as you can see on the right side is the bodily disposition of the tiger, and on the right side is a human face, and this human face is the interiority of the spirit tiger. So these two civilizations, the Yupik and the Mak Betisek, which are thousands of miles apart and with no connection conceivable between them, have devised a same process, the same device, in order to convey this idea of the metamorphosis, that is the commutation between the physicality and the interiority of a being, which is a sort of one of the few formal proofs that we can get in the social sciences of the generality of a pattern that is not based on historical diffusion. This can be done also in another way. It's by painting on the body. That is by, in fact, transforming the body into something else by painting on it elements of an animal spirit. In that case, you have the on the right a frog, and on the left a bear. And when the Franz Boas, who had these collected these drawings among the Quacult, presented them as recto verso, it gives not a very good idea of what they are about, because in fact they should be seen and imagined as the body is acting the part either of a bear or of a frog. You can see on the right that the frog is on the back with the face of the frog on the buttocks of the boy, and is the underpart of the frog is on the torso. And so you should imagine the boy playing the part of a frog and reconstructing through his movements the part of the frog, or the frog as it is. But obviously, it's an oscillating iconicity, in the sense that at one moment you see the frog, and immediately at the same time you are almost I mean, it's obvious that it's a human that does the trick, no? So it's an oscillating realization of this combination of a spirit with an identifiable body and something which is a human-like interiority that is rendered present, not as among the Yupik by a small face inserted in a mask, but by the fact that it's a human that plays the part of the frog or the bear. And the same kind of phenomenon can be observed very far from the northwest coast in Papua New Guinea, among the Kaluli. This is a pair of photographs that were taken by Stephen Feld, very well known anthropologist of Papua New Guinea, in a wonderful book, Sound and Sentiment. And on the left is shown a costume, a traditional costume of the man, and on which bears a number of symbolic signs that can be deciphered and correspond to some of the social qualities of this man at his age and in this specific situation. And on the right is a photograph of a man wearing the same costume during a ritual that goes on for the whole night, and which among the Kaluli, and it's very common also in this part of central New Guinea, around the Mount Bozave, is impersonating a bird, since the dead in this whole area transformed into birds, and so rituals are in part organized in such a way as to render the deceased present through their embodiment as birds. And then, as Stephen Feld writes in his monograph, one of his friends, Kaluli, tells him, "You are here in the middle of the night and you are tired because these rituals go on for the whole night. And then you open your eyes, and then he's here, the man bird. And this is when he's flapping his feathers. And for a moment, much like the one before, although you know it's a man, you have the illusion that the bird is present, or a man bird at least, that is a deceased kin that takes the form of a bird." And this is again, another part of the animist archipelago, among the Yanomami. You have to remember that humans, that animals appear or well think they are humans, and when they appear to humans, they take the appearance of a human. So how do animals and animal spirits who see themselves as humans differentiate themselves between them, between species and within a species? They differentiate themselves in Amazonia, at least, by wearing paintings, body paintings, much like humans who differentiate themselves by their body paintings. And so when a shaman wants to go and visit an animal community, he has to wear an ontological camouflage. That is, he has to wear the same on his naked body, the same paintings that he thinks the animals are wearing to differentiate themselves, and then be accepted as a bona fide, a member of the species. And this is very important because in all the world of the archipelago of animism, the misfortunes of the body and the soul are provoked by animals, because animals when you kill and eat animals, you cannot prevent yourself from eating part of the subjectivity. And so in spite of all the rituals that are organized in order to decontaminate animals, it's inevitable that you will absorb part of the subjectivity. As one famous Inuit shaman, Ivalwarjok, which was the main informant of Rasmussen, said, the great peril of humanity is that our food is entirely made of souls. So in order to cure, a shaman has to visit animal communities and use this kind of ontological camouflage in order to convince animal communities that they must let go their reprisals on the human and consent to restoring his health. Now we'll shift to a very different world, which is our world. And as I said before, although naturalism appears in the texts in the 17th century, in the period of the so-called scientific or mechanistic revolution, they can be observed the emergence of naturalist ontology, a naturalist form of worlding, emerged much earlier in the images of illuminations, for instance, in the 15th century. This is a very famous book of prayer, Les Très Riches Heures du Duc de Berry, and one of these images describes October, and it's quite striking by contrast with other kinds of images that were produced not so long before by the obsession with the emulation of human vision. The idea is to reproduce exactly what can be observed with minute details in a specific situation at a specific time of the day, at a specific time of the year. And so I can't enter into all the details of the image, but there is nothing like that even a few years or more, or a few decades before. And what is important in this kind of image is that naturalism in images announces the two features of naturalism, which is the singularity of humans as having an interiority by contrast with all other elements of the world, and the fact that the world is organized much as a natural system. So it's the painting of the soul, on the one hand, of the human soul, while the preceding images were the painting of animal souls also. Here, the image makers were interested in the painting of the souls exclusively of humans and in the description of nature, in particular through the invention of landscape painting. This is very clear in this image by Robert Campin, which is a triptych of which the central part, which is the Annunciation, has been retrieved. And you see on the eliminated, and you see on the left the donators, which have a presence in the description and painting and rendering of their face and their gaze, which is also quite uncommon in previous images. And on the right, the description of a world which is full of elements that are organized in a day-to-day setting, which is Saint Joseph in his workshop. I can't enter into the details of that, but I chose specifically images from Northern painting because there's no attempt, as in Florentine paintings, at the monofocal perspective. No? So it's not so much the organization, which, as Panofsky has shown, is based on the idea that there's a subjective organization of the world, which starts from the observation of the spectator and is rendered by the painter. But it's based on the minuteness of the description of the world, which must again emulate human vision. And this emulation of human vision is a very specific and bizarre aspect of naturalism, which one rarely finds elsewhere. And this is the achievement of the one of the best achievement of, and it's a very complex painting. I can't enter into the discussion of it because it's a mystic conversation. So the Virgin is not there. The Virgin is being seen. It's a vision of Chancelier Rollin, but you can see all this dimension, and I mean the personality of the Chancellor, who is a sort of prime minister, is there both through the depiction of his face and through his capacity as a human soul to envision the Virgin, and the organization of the world in something which is not a perfect perspective, because they are it's not, it's been calculated, but which gives the impression of a world which is organized as a world of its own. Here we switch to totemism. This is a typical painting by the Kunwishku in northwestern Australia on bark, and it's called an X-ray painting because it shows the organs and the skeleton of the totemic animal, and in this case a kangaroo. And the idea is that you can see that this animal is not engaged with other animals, or is not set up in a specific environment. It's alone. So it's a sort of embodied structure of the totemic group. And this, in order for this structure, for the idea of structure to become visible, there is this X-ray technique of depicting what it is made of. No, it's all its components, and furthermore, these components can be read also as a vademecum for cutting up and distributing the meat of an animal between the different kin and of the totemic group. Here, the correspondence between the antiloping kangaroo, the totemic being, and a human is rendered visible by the fact that their similarity of internal structure are emphasized by putting the kangaroo standing up on his hind leg. It may not be always an animal. It can be also, I mean, the totemic beings, prototypes of all kinds, and some of them are humanoids like this one. But the interesting aspect here is that it has in its body all the ritual paraphernalia that are being used in rituals. You can see it in his testicles, in his lungs. These are ritual objects. And so it's not a being that is like the one we've seen before in the naturalist setting, that is being set up in an environment doing something. It's a being that embodies in his body, that incarnates in its body all the elements of the world. So it's not something in the world, it's the world into a being. In Central Australia, people do not depict the beings of the Dreamtime, the totemic prototypes. They depict their traces, of the traces they left in the world. And these are easily identifiable traces, no? Forms of prints left by kangaroos, for instance, on the upper part of the image, according to their gait, or humans, or wild birds, etc. And this is in part the result of an indexical way of describing the actions of these prototypes by narrating their deeds when they were living on the surface of the earth, and by tracing them as a sort of punctuation on the ground, and as it is done here on sand. And in fact, they are being used also, these graphemes on bodies and ritual objects in order to define the kind of totemic beings that are referred to, not by resemblance, not by an iconic dimension, but through the traces they left in the world. And the modern, the contemporary paintings, which are quite well known now, because they are very much in favor in the international ethnic art market, are in fact composed of the same graphemes. I won't enter into the details, but they are very recognizable because they depict also parts of the itinerary of a totemic being. And so now we switch to the last form, the last regime of worlding in images. And as I said before, one of the clues for this regime is the correspondence between microcosm and microcosm. An interesting aspect of this image we see, which is the zodiacal body, that is the correspondence between the human body and the signs of the zodiac, which is a tradition which starts in Egypt and that's been going on ever since, is that it is taken from the same picture, from the same book of prayer that I used before to depict the emergence of naturalist images, no? Les Traits Régisseurs du Duc de Berry. And in fact, it shows that this period of the 15th century is extremely interesting in the sense that it's a period of transition between analogism and naturalism. And in the same book, and painted by the same people, you find examples of either an analogist form of worlding, which is very ancient and stabilized on the one hand, and very new forms of depicting the world, which are typically naturalist. And you find that elsewhere. This is a modern painting of a yogi bearing the indexes of the correspondence between macrocosm and macrocosm. In some cases, it's impossible to depict because there are so many, especially in Vedic tradition correspondences, that it cannot be figured. So they are described in texts, but you cannot figure them because of the complexity of the connections. This comes from another part of the world. It's ritual mesa, which is used in the Andes of Peru by mestizo curadores, which is there are people who cure patients who come to visit them by this remarkable installation. So the image here is not in all the components of the image, it's the totality of the things present, which, as you can see, come from very different settings. There are pre-Columbian archaeological artifacts, there are small phials with liquids, there are Christian figurines, there are staffs and which are and canes that are linked to formal authority, etc., etc. And in fact, what the therapist does is that it connects every time different elements of this installation according to the symptoms of the person that he wants to cure. And so it's a system of multiple possible correspondences between elements of the world that are that one can fit to specific cases according to circumstances. So this is from, again, a very different part of the world, the Cook Islands, and it's a way to figure a process of descent. It's a lineage in a way. So you have the face of a god and an ancestor god, which encapsulates all the descending generations that claim a connection to this meta person. And in order to show that each generation has a close link to the god and the ancestor, they are depicted in the same way, but not in the same position. So the idea, again, as in all analogist figuration, or images is that you have a connecting principle, but a connecting principle that unites different elements, heterogeneous elements. And of course, this principle is rendered obvious in chimera. That is, this one is famous because it's identified with a king, and so it's connected also to a saying. It illustrates a motto that the king mentioned when the French were attacking his kingdom, and he said the shark is going to attack the ships. And so he is figured here under the figure of a shark. And in fact, chimerae are a very obvious way also of combining very different elements coming from different worlds, of course, and different bodies of different species, etc., and organizing them in such a way that they appear to form an autonomous being. And this is a good example of it, which is the great mask of the Oruro Diablada in Bolivia, which combines elements from the pre-Columbian past and elements from the colonizers, in particular of the Catholic religion. And so these images of chimera are very apt at representing forms of hybridity or colonial hybridity. I can't enter into the details here, but let me just point out the fact that the dragons on the head are referring to the deities of the infra world. It's linked to the cooperation of the miners in Oruro. So people who are used to live in the depths of the mountains and deal with the spirits of the mountains, which are in many cases which have to be placated by offerings, etc. And you have the traditional figure of the devil through the horns of the ram, and whether there are also references to bats, which are elements of the infra world in the traditional islands of the Andes conception of the relations with the spirits in the mountains. And so, to conclude, because I think I've gone much beyond the time that was allocated to me, to conclude, these images testify that in the way they are organized, not in part in what they show, but in the way in which they organize what they attempt to represent, revealed some of the basic features of the ways of worlding that can be detected here and there on the surface of the world. There are other aspects to images which I don't have the time to enter into, and in fact, in part, the way they exert an agency. The agency of images, in fact, which is something on which historians of art and anthropologists have attracted the attention over the years, operate in different ways according to the ontological regime under which they were produced. But I won't, if you invite me for another talk, I might do that at another time.
Thank you so much, Philippe. Do we have questions online? Not yet. So feel free to ask all the questions you want. Maybe I have two questions for you to open up the floor for discussion. The one is you describe a very interesting shift in your own work from more textual material to images. May I push you on this issue? I mean, it's not as obvious as it may seem. I mean, to shift from that, and maybe to have a question about the way images have always been taken very seriously at the USUSS. I mean, there is a very long tradition at the USUSS pushing for taking seriously images, and we live in a world of images. And that's my first question. The second is about your methodology and the way you collect evidence. You have shown us different kinds of images. And so I want to know a little bit more about the way you collect them and you build your own collection of evidence. And I have maybe a small question about colors and shades. You have never mentioned that the way that you have never described the images themselves. I mean, you have told us about internal organization and social organization of images, but images are also colors and shades and way of depicting things, souls or whatever you call them. So two questions for you, Philippe, and once again, thank you very much for your great.
Well, to begin, yes, thank you. To begin with, I was always interested in images personally. So I am an avid reader of historian of art, in particular the historian of art in this institution in the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, who has, as you say, a great tradition in the history of art. I read a lot of Marin, Damisch, and people like that, and Didier Berman. And so it was a way of reconciling a personal interest in images with an intellectual pursuit. The way I selected images was somewhat empirical at the beginning. I spent a year, I took a sabbatical leave some years ago. I was invited by a foundation in Munich, and at the time, it's not completely accidental. I quit smoking, and it was a very difficult experience. And I decided to spend the whole year in this place in Munich, which is a city where there is a very important institute of history of art, several great museums, and a very good museum of ethnography. And I immersed myself in images and in the comments of these images for a year, accumulating material. And what I did initially was to select images from the cultures, let's say, or the civilizations which I had identified initially in my book, in my previous book, as being either animist or totemist or naturalist, etc. And working with these images, I found out that there were specific patterns that were obvious in these images. And from these patterns, I moved towards other kinds of images that had obviously had followed the same patterns of construction. And I tried to ascertain whether these patterns corresponded to the kind of regimes that I had identified before. So it was a very empirical business, no? Which started first by taking images as illustration, and then as indexes of patterns. So this in part is response to the answer to the question of methodology. The question of color is a it's quite difficult because, in fact, by image I take things that are anything that figures, no, and so color may not be a very important thing in this. It's an element among others, no. Some kinds of images I found extremely interesting is that images that are not images in themselves, but which trigger the idea of an image. They are iconogenic in a way. And this is the case of facial paintings in the area where I work in the Upper Amazon, where there are no images in the traditional sense. There is no iconic image, but people, especially men, wear very complex face paintings. And these face paintings refer to specific images that they cannot depict, but and in fact they cannot see themselves. They could not for a long time see themselves for lack of mirror as this embodiment of an image made of signs, no, which were not iconic in itself. So there's a very large definition of images, and color is only one aspect of this multidimensionality of images.
So we have a question online. I was wondering whether you find images that fail to corroborate the postulate ways of worlding, or that reveal the continuity between ontological regime, or on the contrary, equivocal indexical relations. Philippe.
Alors, yes, I worked and I published a book on this general anthropology of figuration 2 years ago, which is called The Forme du Visible. And in this book, I take up the question of hybridity. And I take two cases. One is on the Northwest coast. There's a group of people on the border between British Columbia and Alaska, which are the Tsimshian, the Haida, etc., which are interesting in the sense that their images are, some of their images are obviously typically totemic, and others are typically animist. And in fact, they represent the same things. I mean, they represent animal spirits, but the way they are depicted and the rituals in which they are used and the persons who make them are completely dissociated. And it's interesting to see in this case a form of structural hybridity between two ontological regimes and two regimes of figuration. The other case that I was interested in is, of course, the one on which we have an enormous amount of material. It's contemporary painting. I mean, the great shift that happened with Cubism, when precisely one of the aspects of naturalism in formal terms is the fact that it's it's the monoperspectivism that as Panofsky again has shown very well in his work on perspective. It's the point of view of one observer which constructs the world around according to his or her gaze. Monoperspectivism is exceptional in the history of figuration. In the Middle Ages, for instance, there are numerous cases of polyperspectivism, and there is polyperspectivism almost everywhere else. And so what happens with Cubism is that precisely after almost 5 centuries of polyperspectivism, suddenly Picasso, Braque, and the others reintroduce polyperspectivism. And from this period onwards, we have an extraordinary efflorescence of hybridity, not in the sense that painters borrow from other traditions, but in the sense that they express themselves without the constraints of the canons, the academic constraints of naturalism, and combine either according to one's own style or even by combining different styles in their own lifespan, in order to produce an extraordinary diversity of ontological transfigurations of naturalism. And in a way, in the same way that naturalism appeared in images long before it was described or analyzed in texts, in the same way one can say that the contemporary period is remarkably interesting in the sense that artists, as visionaries, they always were visionaries, but as visionaries have presented us with other alternative worlds. And I could quote many contemporary artists that follow this line now. Alternative worlds that are not naturalist anymore. And so they are a good food for thought for us to try to understand towards what new world we are going.
Thank you. We have two more questions. Maybe I will take them in a row if you want to. The first is images on the. Do you consider that images, and I read the question, do you consider that images on the ontological could also refer to dreams and representation from music? So the first question online. And the second, do you think that the unbridled circulation of virtual images can change their agency in social life? So music and agency.
Difficult question. I didn't deal with music, although I suspect that it's a suspicion, but I have no way to prove that. I would be delighted if anyone would enter into this seriously into this question, whether there are different kinds of music according to ontological frameworks. As for dreams, it's quite difficult. I mean, it's the same. I mean, I like all anthropologists, like all of us here at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, we're empirists, no? So we base our propositions on the consideration of material. And I don't know any work that there are works in anthropology on ethnomusicology and comparative ethnomusicology. There are works on the dreaming mechanisms, of course, but nothing which relates. And I didn't do that myself. So I would very much appreciate if anyone interested in the topic could pursue these ideas now. The third question, it's difficult to answer also because most of these virtual images are naturalist images, no? And so their agency is based on the kind of agency which is typical of naturalism, which is mimesis, no? They seem to us real because they look so much like what we see, by contrast with many other kinds of images in other ontological contexts. So their agency seems to me based on this, and this is why they are so efficient, and in many cases why their efficiency is in a way terrifying, because it's very difficult to impose a barrier or a distance between these images and how we react to them, because they were as if it's something that we observed in reality. And so I don't think they can change their agency in social life if you take into account that the agency, what is the agency, for instance, of totemic images? In certain rituals in Australia, totemic beings are represented not mimetically, that is, not because they are supposed to look like the dancers that impersonate them, but because on their bodies is reproduced the itinerary that these totemic beings followed on the earth. So it's completely indexed, it's an indexical agency. And this is very classical in general of images in Australia, it seems to me to be indexical. And it is very different from the kind of images that, in which we are immersed every day. So we have to take into account that every kind of, every ontological formula of image producing has its own form of agency and acts upon people according to this form of agency. In animism, the agency is based on the idea, in fact, that images are images of spirits, no? And so they have agency because the image impersonates, embodies, and a spirit, which as a spirit has an action, or can potentially have an action, can activate things, and in particular by in relation to someone. Analogous images have an agency because they seem to follow a rule which is a social rule, and so we have to emphasize the fact that most images, until not so long ago, were ritual images, and so the kind of images, the circulation of virtual images, most of these virtual images are not virtual images; they are propaganda images. No, so they follow very different lines of agency than the ritual images. Analogist images, again, are ritual images where the images behave as if they were social agents, and so they interact between them as if they were social agents. A very good example is India, no, where in temples you have images of the gods that are treated like persons, but they're not treated like persons like in animism, because they are not spirits that have an action towards someone. They are treated as if they were persons. So they are given food. They are put to bed at night. They take walks with people who accompany them, etc., etc. And so it's like a small theater where they are activated, and so they are not person in the sense that there is no interiority in them. They are person in the sense that they behave like persons because humans make them behave like persons. So that's the agency. I don't think that the circulation of images now has this kind of agency. So.
Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, everybody online. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to have you to start the third season of the EHESS Spring Talks. And we meet again in 2 days with Isabelle Ville from the EHESS with a talk on different faces of disability in today's world, and Brigitte Derlon will be will make the commentary on Isabelle's Wilstock. So once again, Philippe, thank you so much for your great presentation of this,
pleasure.
this great work. Thank you so much.
Bye bye, everyone.